Welcome to Reaching World Podcast, where we highlight the world's largest network of influencers for good, love, and service. Join us in saying thank you to these incredible individuals and organizations by listening, subscribing, and sharing their legacies. And by doing this together, we will help inspire others to leave their legacy of service and love. I'm your host, Zach Garner. Thanks for joining us today on Reaching World Podcast. We are honored to be highlighting Wayne Irish, managing partner of HomeCareMatch.com, a revolutionary platform that allows caregivers and families to be matched, cutting out the middleman, such as agencies. We're going to hear about Wayne's mission, his purpose, and the value that HomeCareMatch.com is bringing to the marketplace. We'll go ahead and jump right into the interview. So Wayne, go ahead and tell our listeners about yourself, about HomeCareMatch.com, and how you got involved with HomeCare.
Got involved with HomeCare back in 1986. My education and background is actually in computers, and back in the day I would have never dreamed I'd get involved with HomeCare, but my stepfather ended up breaking his neck and becoming paralyzed from the shoulders down. And 10 years post-injury, my mother called me and said, "Wayne, if we don't do something, they're going to kill him." So we got together and decided back in 1986 that we would start our own company to provide in-home care. Little did we know at that time, but we were one of only about a dozen home care agencies that focused just on providing non-medical home care services in the country. So we considered ourselves one of the pioneers as we look back. And as I've met with a number of the other owners of companies that started around the same time frame, we all agreed that we were pioneers in trying to figure out this new industry called home care.
So tell us a little bit more about, so today now you're involved with HomeCareMatch.com. So what made the transition from being a consultant going around the country to your online platform now?
You know, as we looked at the changes that were happening in the home care industry and the regulations, there was a lot of targets that were put on, both from the Federal Department of Labor removing a exemption that had been in the industry since 1974, and that automatically changed the cost of care in the home. And then we started looking at how agencies were adapting and changing to meet some of the other regulations that had come out, where we had caregivers that were getting their hours reduced to 30 or less, and now all of a sudden caregivers are working in multiple agencies to make ends meet, and then you have families that the costs had increased. And looking at all of that, I decided that there had to be a better way to help both the families and the caregivers so that the families could reduce their costs significantly, and then at the same time provide an avenue where caregivers could actually increase their pay. So as we started looking at different options and different criteria in order for us to meet that objective, we started well over 5 years ago, even while I still had the other agency in place, and looking at different options and being able to provide this goal of reducing the cost of the families, increasing the pay. And so what we came up with about 2 years ago is what we now have, which is HomeCareMatch.com. And what that is really it's a marketplace where we provide a site where families are able to put in what their criteria is for care in their home and what their preferences are. And caregivers are able to put in their background, their expertise, their certifications, and any kind of criminal background checks that they have and DMV printouts that they have, so that families then are able to have access to the caregivers. And what happens on our site is that what the families are looking for and the expertise of the caregivers and their availability then get matched with an algorithm. And on the desktop of the families comes up the first four, and they have the opportunity to scroll through far more, but the first four caregivers that meet the highest percentage of their criteria. So they have a little picture and first name and last initial. And then the family gets to take a look at what their availability is and what some of their experiences have been. Then the family can actually, through the site, initiate some conversation through texting, and then the family makes the overture and says they want to match. That goes to the caregiver. Caregiver has to agree to the match, and then it comes back to the family and actually gets approved to the match. And so what we are able to do is remove the cost center of agencies. And doing that, we've been able to reduce the cost of the family anywhere from 35 to 50%. And because of the removal of that cost, the caregivers are able to get paid significantly more. Again, we feel that they're going to be able to see costs increase for their services from anywhere from 25 to 40%. And so what we look at here is a win-win. And so we're very excited about this. And And being able to talk to a number of organizations, hospitals, and nurses throughout the West, we've had just a tremendous response in a favorable way of understanding that this is a new and maybe the next generation of home care.
That is incredible. Thank you for sharing that. So you would say your mission, your purpose of the whole platform is to increase caregivers' basic payout and then save the families money.
That's our goal, and the numbers and the data support that. If a family is able to save, let's just grab a number of 40%, then that means that their loved one is going to be able to stay at home 40% longer at that same cost. So, having the experience of having a loved one being cared for in the home, as we did with my stepfather, he was 22 years post-injury, it makes a difference for their quality of care. And being able to help families have the financial resources to keep their loved ones home longer, for us, that's a win. And at the same time, if we're able to give these caregivers who are really the front line of all of these agencies, in fact, no home care agency would be able to survive today if they didn't have the time that the caregivers provide to their clientele. And so, again, we look at that as a cost center. Being able to remove that cost center enables caregivers to actually be able to get paid closer to $15 or more an hour.
Why don't you go ahead and tell us about some recent highlights or what your organization is doing now, and maybe some of the success stories of people being on the platform and what you hope those individuals that are using the platform, what their outcome may be.
Yeah, we had a nurse that has a family member in the Midwest, and as we visited with her, she had determined that she had spent over $220,000 in care for her loved one over a 1-year period because her loved one required around-the-clock care. And as we were visiting with her and explaining the benefits of being able to hire directly and to negotiate some rates and put in the numbers of what we felt that she could pay caregivers, she was able to save well over $120,000 in the upcoming year by utilizing our services. It floored her, and we were excited to see that those numbers that we had talked about in regards to the savings for the family is real based on just that one experience. Knowing that her caregivers were getting paid around $9.50 an hour and being able to increase their wages to $15 an hour by eliminating that agency, she was going to be able to save that $120,000. So when you think of that, and what she looked at me and said, Zach, was, Wayne, that means I can keep my mother home an extra 2 years before I have to start thinking about a facility because of the financial resources that her mother had from her retirement and other avenues that they've had to take care of her in her older years. So that was thrilling for us to realize that we would be able to help that family that length of time and still provide 24-hour care around the clock for their loved ones. So those are the kind of things that we're going to be able to do for a number of families across the country.
How inspiring and motivating to you guys. I'm sure that just refuels the energy and excitement and passion that you have for your mission. So if I'm listening to this podcast and hearing about HomeCareMatched.com for the first time, how may I get involved with the organization, or where can I find you guys on what social media platforms?
Yeah, we have our website, which is the HomeCareMatched.com, and then we're also on Facebook. In fact, that's where we have a lot of our caregivers reach us through. And then you can also reach me directly at Wayne@HomeCareMatched.com.
Wayne, again, I appreciate your time today and sharing your mission and your purpose of your platform. If there's one thing that you would like to leave with our listeners today that they can remember specifically about your organization, what would be that one thing you'd want to leave with them?
Well, I appreciate that, Zach. I think the one thing that I want everybody to understand is that at some point in time, if they haven't already had that experience, they're going to have a loved one who's going to need care. And then the decision is going to be, are we going to keep them home or are we going to institutionalize them? You can call it all the other flowery things of assisted living and senior care facility. But the fact is that if they leave the house and they go into a facility, it really is institutionalizing them. And oftentimes their loved ones, when they're institutionalized, they don't thrive and their quality of life is not as good as when they're at home. So when you're faced with those kind of things, you have to look at all of the options and you have to look at all of the issues involved. And one of the bigger issues is if we keep them at home, how do we afford that? How can we make sure that this happens, and where do we get the resources, and how does that work? Well, we now have given you an avenue through HomeCareMatch.com where your able to remove the cost and overhead of agencies and be able to reduce your cost by anywhere from 35 to 50%. As you consider where you want to put your loved one, we want you to remember that HomeCareMatch.com is going to be your best economic resource for that service.
Perfect. Summed up perfectly right there with Wayne Irish, managing partner of HomeCareMatch.com. We look forward to the expansion and growth of your platform and the great mission and purpose that you are bringing families and those needing care all across the nation. These episodes will be launched on Mondays and Thursdays. And if you'd like someone to be on the podcast, if you think there's someone in your network that should be recognized for the good they are doing in the world, please reach out to us and send us a direct message. We can be found at Reaching World Podcast on Facebook.com. So be sure to find us there, like our page, and submit any ideas or suggestions of individuals or organizations that should be highlighted on this podcast. Now, to finish today's episode, a couple additional ads from our sponsors. Are you a business owner that would like to maximize your staff or sales team's production and overall performance? Go to buildyourtraining.com and see how business owners are empowering their teams by digitizing a cloud-based training platform. Again, go to buildyourtraining.com to help unleash your team's overall potential and performance.